So I thought we were going to kind of baby step our way into this podcast, and after about an hour or so, we would have hit all the talking points. But Om just put all of them into like this condensed like elevator pitch and just pitched the whole game to us one by one. It was like putting the entire movie in a trailer, and now you don't have to watch the movie anymore. That's what Om just did. So a lot of interesting talking points in everything you guys just said. I think it is an interesting discussion to just talk about Elche at this point again. And I know this is a Real Madrid podcast, and if we're going to break down an opponent, maybe Elche is not the most interesting one, but I would almost argue that it is quite interesting, Elche specifically, because they're such a small team. And if you look at their numbers heading into this game, dead last in pressures in the attacking third, dead last in pressures in the middle third, dead last in the league in shot creating actions, dead last in expected assists, key passes, passes into the final third, passes into the penalty area, dead last in all those categories. And those are the ones I just checked quickly. And so I think, like, in theory, if you're going to decide to press a team mercilessly and be aggressive with it, Elche seems like a safe bet to do that against, given that, you don't expect them to just kind of Barcelona 2009 their way out of a press. And it is interesting also to note that in my mind, and I think in all of our minds, the first and second half were quite different, right? But I think if you were to kind of decide like who was on top in each half, we would probably all collectively say Real Madrid were the better team in the first half, Elche were the better team in the second half. And you brought up like they must have said something at halftime, and I actually asked Jesus Munoz about that, and he said, yeah, like at halftime we came to the collective basically understanding and agreement that we weren't that good defensively, but we knew that we were still in the game, so we made some adjustments and came out better in the second half. And he didn't really elaborate what those things were. My take on it was that the passing out of the back actually improved. And I also thought they defended passes over the top from Real Madrid a little bit better, although granted, I don't know if Real Madrid necessarily exploited it that much either. But I also want to highlight in particular a few players from their side. One, the two central midfielders in Victor Rodriguez and Raul Guti, I thought their passing was quite crisp and tidy. And Marcone, his passing wasn't as good as those two, but he was still pretty good. And then offensively, basically they relied on Fidel, who obviously scored the penalty and had a couple good moments against Lucas Vazquez and Carvajal, but maybe more dangerously, the opposite side was Rigoni, who Matt mentioned beat Marcelo in one sequence, shoots it from a pretty difficult angle. He also had that one play in the second half where he burned Ramos. And you guys remember when I forget which game was it. Was it A-Bar? We were talking about Ramos maybe a step slow, like just physically. Like I noticed it in this game too, where Rigoni just blows by him and Ramos just like he does not have the legs to keep up with him.
Is this the Boye shot, the 62nd minute?
Possibly, because I think it was a separate sequence than that. Hold on, I'll just pull up. Because the Boye shot was also one that started behind Marcelo, right? Like that's where the play initially formed.
Marcelo got burned over the top by that one, and then Ramos was slow to kind of recover to that.
The Rigoni one actually, it was with Ramos was actually in the first half. Made a mistake. It was in the 40th minute where he just doesn't have the legs to keep up. And then Lucas Boye was like kind of their offensive guy. Like he was the one who, between him, Fidel, and Rigoni, I thought he was the best out of the three. He actually worked really hard defensively too. So those are the things that I picked up on from their team. But I also don't know. So I actually disagree. I push back a little bit on you guys, and I don't think the first half their press, the way they dealt with their press, was that good. I thought they struggled a lot dealing with Real Madrid's counter press in particular, and I thought like this is why we do the podcast, three of us together, so that if I missed anything, you guys can pick up and vice versa. I thought there were two times where the press really broke down. One was Benzema slips and Varane actually intervenes, and they actually end up scoring from that. And then there was another one too that they just broke down. But I thought overall the pressing was pretty good and effective, and I thought Elche were uncomfortable dealing with that. Again, the second half was a little bit different. But this is the other thing I wanted to say. In the second half, where we see, like, in my mind, Elche, I thought, was on top, and they were. But if you look at the chances created, all of Real Madrid's chances came in the second half, especially late. Like, even when the more Elche bunkered in, the more chances Real Madrid had. So they had the Ramos one point blank. They had the Carvajal one in the 69th minute. And then a couple half chances from Hazard and Ramos in the 6-yard box. In the first half, they really had nothing. And that Asensio flamethrower shot that hit the box, and then the Marcelo crossbar one. Those chances, those were the only two. And they were kind of like freak sequences, right?
Well, there's you're missing two. One is because it didn't show up on the actual stat board because I don't think he actually touched it, was that great cross from Ramos
to Benzema
in the 30th minute. Yeah, and the diving header.
Yeah.
And I actually went back and looked at that play, and Madrid, this was probably one of their better build-up plays. There 26 passes before actually that cross went off from Ramos to Benzema. So it was nice build-up play, but the thing that was so frustrating to see, as Omen and I kind of joked about earlier, was just where Casemiro was positioned. He was basically number 10 or target man, number 9, whatever you want to call it, the most advanced up the pitch. Actually, he was higher than Benzema at times because Benzema would drop in to connect. And so that was frustrating. I felt like this was such a perfect game, especially that first half for the blonde trident, as we call it, the blonde midfield with Odegaard, Kroos, and Modric. I thought this would have been perfect. And then the other good opportunity was, I think this is a better opportunity than it's given credit for, is the Toni Kroos header in the box really early on, 2 minutes in.
Yep.
And what Kroos did really well there, and I think this is something that would aid us in chance creation, is at the start of that play, he was actually in his, pseudo center back position, playing that quarterback role, as I like to call it, ditching out passes. And then he just, as soon as he dishes out the last pass, he runs up the pitch, and none of the Elche midfield tracked him. Nobody tracked him because he was so deep prior to that. And so he just gradually goes up the pitch, and then no one from Elche communicated that he was moving into their box, and so the I guess it was the right back was scrambling the last minute to try and get there to mark him. And so I think that's something that those late arriving runs, especially from how deep he was, can be something that helps us in creating opportunities.
So it's interesting that Munoz said at the press conference that he felt Elche didn't defend that well, because I actually kind of agree with that for two reasons. One, in the first half, is this idea of balls over the box threatening them, not over the box, sorry, but over the top, threatening them way too easily. And there's, I guess, this idea that you can just defend in a mid-block by just kind of being compact and sitting there and just asking teams to break you down. The issue is you have spacing behind, right? And if you have someone like Carvajal making good runs over the top, if you have Lucas Vazquez making runs, if you have Asensio making runs, players like Modric and Kroos are going to be able to hit them no problem, right? What makes mid-block defending effective is, you're not going all in on the high press, but what it allows you to do is press from a safer position and make those passes in behind tougher. So then you reduce the margin of error. There's lesser amounts of space for your defenders to close, and it's like a happy middle ground between deep block defending and high pressing. The issue is besides Boye, who was quite isolated in any kind of pressing action, is there was very little pressure on Modric and Kroos. Now, I'm not saying doing that is super easy or anything, especially with the fluidity of the movement, and we know how hard it is to keep track of Modric, but if you want to be committed to kind of that mid-block defending, you need to find some way of making life difficult for deeper ball possessors, and Elche weren't doing that. And just to be quite frank, Elche were lucky that Real Madrid weren't spamming those balls over the top. Kiyan mentioned it. I think there was a real kind of marginal gain we could have made efficiency-wise with that, and we only saw maybe 4 or 5 of those attempts, and all of them looked quite dangerous. So that's the one part of it for me, but also their box defending was kind of iffy, in my opinion. Matt talked about not tracking that Kroos header, but for me it was more in the second half, where this is after they shrank into a deep block, so these balls over the top aren't as threatening. They just made mistakes, right? The Ramos chance, which is probably the best one shot location wise, came from a whiffed clearance, right? Like Ramos should have gotten nowhere near the ball. I can't remember who it was, but it was just easy connection, right? You just put your foot on the ball and it's away, and he just completely whiffs on it. And Ramos puts the shot on target. I think the goalkeeper does really well there. And then the other one, which I can't remember if you guys mentioned, but it doesn't show up on the shot board because I don't think Benzema actually touched it, but it was the Modric cross from deep, and Benzema kind of like trying this backwards header, and on the replay, I couldn't definitively see whether he touched it or not, and it goes wide. There were 3 defenders in the box, 2 near Karim, and neither marked him with like enough time to kind of decide what they want to do. So like if I were like to be critical of Elche's performance, if I was like part of the coaching staff or whatever, that's what I'd be pointing out. Like, sure, there were some final third inefficiencies and stuff like that Matt was talking about, but with the quality of player you have, that's kind of where you see the difference the most, right? Just lesser quality players don't, in the little amount of time you have, make the decisive action as often as better players do. But it's those moments to me which are avoidable, even if you're not an especially talented defender. You can't be losing Benzema like that. You can't be like missing a clearance that allows Ramos a chance to put Real Madrid in front. So those are the moments for me where I thought, okay, that's where Elche are a little off. And it's why I thought, like, even though I wasn't particularly inspired by our offensive approach, I could see a moment where we put a cross into the box, Elche make a mistake, and Casemiro comes in and scores a header or something. So that was for me where I saw the victory kind of coming from, but it had more to do with, I think, Elche making some errors rather than Real Madrid doing anything particularly special.